Hi, I'm Ryan Taffet, and I'm the product manager for Lenco Marine. I'm here today with Kevin Brostek, who is our system support specialist for Lenco as well. We're here with this Boston Whaler 230 Outrage, nice 2026 model boat, and we are going to go over an entire installation of our Pro Control Auto and Assist system on board this vessel. Now we're going to go over unboxing your Lenco Pro Control kit. So everything that's on this table will be included in your typical Pro Control kit. There may be some variance from kit to kit. One of the first things you'll see when opening up the package is going to be a pair of our Lenco SD Pro actuators that are specific to our Pro Control product family. One of the next things that you'll see in the package as well is going to be our Lenco Pro Control controller itself. You'll have an auto controller or an assist controller, depending on the system that you've purchased. The controller will also have a locking collar that's packaged separately. Another core element of the system that you'll see in Pro Control Auto will be our IMU. This device will be mounted on board the vessel, and this will measure all the dynamic motions on board for the system to make auto leveling decisions. As an accessory to the IMU, you may also opt to purchase a bracket for mounting in interior spaces on board the vessel. If you've purchased the complete Pro Control kit as opposed to one of our retrofit kits, another core element that you'll see in the package is going to be the trim tabs or the blades themselves. Those will vary depending on the needs of your vessel. Also included in your Pro Control package will be all the necessary network cables to connect everything on board the vessel. These cables may vary depending upon the kit that you've purchased, and your boat may require longer or shorter cables in select applications. Going through the specific cables that are included in your Pro Control kit, we have NMEA 2000 and Lenco 2000 network and drop cables. We also have T connectors to build the Lenco 2K backbone within the vessel, and also to tap into the NEMA 2K backbone that should be existing on board the vessel already for our system to connect into. And we have terminators to complete your Lenco 2K network. We also have a power drop cable for your Lenco 2K network to give the network power. We also have two Deutsch to micro C connectors that will connect your actuators to the Lenco 2K network. We also have power connectors for the actuators as well. We include all the necessary Deutsch connectors to make all the connections on board the vessel. We also include fuse holders and the necessary fuses for the individual actuators, as well as connectors. We have top and bottom actuator mounting brackets. This is the hardware to mount the actuators, with the longer bolt going in the bottom bracket and the shorter bolt going in the top bracket. Another optional component that you can purchase for select boats that are equipped with Mercury digital throttle and steering is a SmartCraft cable that we offer in 3 different lengths that will connect from your keypad into the J-box on board the vessel. Also included in most Pro Control kits will be the wake wire. This purple wire will connect into the back of your Pro Control keypad on one side, and then the other side will connect into your ignition. This will cause the system to wake when the vessel's ignition is turned on, and then to go into standby mode when the vessel's ignition is turned off. And all of our Pro Control kits will also include the necessary installation and operations manuals to walk you through the entire installation, in addition to video content and support available online. We're going to talk about the difference between our 2 Pro Control systems, Pro Control Auto and Pro Control Assist. One of the big things that you'll notice on the keypad is the Auto keypad has these auto and hold buttons in the top. This means that you've purchased our fully automatic system that will control dynamic vessel movements, including pitch and roll. If you've purchased our Pro Control Assist system, your keypad will say Fave 1 and Fave 2. This system has assisted functions such as hull shot mode and driving to 2 favorite positions, but it does not have fully automatic pitch and roll control. Our Pro Control Auto system will also include our IMU, whereas our Pro Control Assist will not include the IMU. Both Pro Control Auto and Pro Control Assist can be connected to up to 2 second station remote keypads. These will drop in on the vessel's NMEA 2000 network. Now we're going to talk about selecting the correct trim tabs for your boat. You'll see on this Boston Whaler, we have pockets that are designed in for the trim tabs. Therefore, we have a very specific trim tab that fits this select pocket. However, on many other boats with flat transoms, we have the option to pick a variety of trim tab types, styles, and shapes based on the performance characteristics of the vessel. One of our preferred trim tab styles is what we call our hybrid trim tab. This tab leverages width to generate lift, as well as a very close push and pivot point on the vessel. This makes our dynamic auto leveling system very responsive. For vessels stored in the water, we recommend sacrificial anodes installed on each blade. Additionally, you'll notice 2 different finishes on our blades. On our left here, we have our electropolish finish. On our right, we have what's called our 2B finish. For boats stored in the water for longer durations, in addition to the anode, we also recommend our 2B finish, as it is easier to prep and coat with anti-fouling coating.
At this time, I'd like to go through the recommended tools to install most Pro Control systems, which inside of our manuals, you will see that we have a tool and material list, which we have on this table. Since all vessels are different, we highly recommend that you read both manuals prior to your installation of the Pro Control system. Also in the manual, if you flip it around, we have a QR code for multiple languages and other countries. Within that list of tools, we have an electric drill, we have a tape measure, we have a 3/16 and 7/16 drill bits within this kit here. We have a 2 1/16 hole saw, a ratchet, a 5/16 Allen head, a pencil. We have sealant for the screws that'll be fastening the blades to the hull, and also the wire passage. We also have a fish tape and some cord that we can pull the cables through. Also on the table, we have necessary protective gear while we're doing the installation, as well as some painter's tape. We have a straight edge that is used to find the appropriate angle for the trim tab relative to the running surface of the vessel. If you don't have a straight edge, you can use a level as well. We also have additional tools that are not listed in the manual that make the job go a little bit easier. We have a universal joint that can make the installation easier when we're working within pockets. We have a set of cutters to trim wires if needed. We have a set of strippers, and we have a set of heavy duty crimpers as well. Now that we've gone over the Pro Control kit, its contents, and the tools required to do the job, let's get started on this beautiful Boston whaler here at the Lenco facility located in Stuart, Florida.
All right, as you can see, our boat is all prepped for install. We've begun by uninstalling the prior existing Lenco system on the boat. Our new system will fit right in this pocket here with geometry that matches the old system. The pocket is cleaned and prepped and ready for installation. One of the first steps in the installation of the trim tab blades and actuators is to rough fit the system to the transom of the boat. In this case, we're actually dealing with the trim tab pocket, so this blade is going to sit relatively flush to the running surface. However, on many boats, we have a recommended offset from the running surface. This is fully described in our installation manual. On this boat, as we're replacing pre-existing blades, we have the holes already drilled in the transom, so it'll be nice and easy to fit this right up in the pocket. Prior to your installation, you'll also want to determine if your trim tab set has a specific port or starboard blade. Now we're applying a durable marine sealant for use below the waterline to the screw holes. Now we're going to install the blade and fasten it to the boat. Be mindful not to over torque the screws during this process. You want the blade to fit nice and snug against the boat, but without over tightening. The number 3 Phillips bit is the size necessary for our blade mounting screws. Now we're going to connect the lower bracket to the blade using the supplied screws. These also have pre-applied Loctite on them, a thread locker. You'll also notice that our bracket has a 3-hole pattern. This will match the 3-hole pattern on Lenco blades. To tighten down the bracket, we're also using that same number 3 Phillips bit. Now we're going to mount the SD Pro actuator to the lower bracket. We're going to use our 5/16 hex head and the supplied longer bolt in the kit. Now we're going to pre-fit the upper bracket to the actuator and to the transom so we can determine what we call the trailing angle of the blade.
So at this point, we're going to just pre-fit the upper bracket to the actuator. We're not going to tighten it down at this point, because at this point what we're doing is we're trying to find the running angle of the tab. Ryan, if you can hold that.
Okay, now we're setting the trailing edge of the blade. On this boat, it's actually going to be a 1/4 inch up from the running surface due to the geometry of the pocket. Once we set this trailing edge, that will determine where the upper mounting bracket holes go to actually fasten the bracket to the boat. Okay, now that we have our trailing edge all set and measured out, we are going to do an outline of the top bracket with a pencil. While marking out the top bracket, it's important not to torque the actuator too hard to one side or the other and let it naturally rest against the transom. Before drilling the upper bracket holes, we want to check to make sure there's no obstructions behind or anything that we could potentially hit with the drill bit. On this boat, it's nice and easy because we have a pie plate right here.
Okay, so now that we have our holes mapped out and where they need to be for the upper bracket, we're going to go ahead and drill the 4 holes on the bracket itself where the mounting screws go with a 3/16 drill bit. For the center hole where the cable passes through, we're going to use a 7/16.
Okay, now we're going to install the upper bracket in the system. So first we're going to pass the wire through the front of the upper bracket. And then we have our gland seal. This will then get installed on the wire with the tapered end, the smaller tapered end, resting in the bracket. Now we're passing the wire loom through the hull, and that's going to go through the larger center hole that we've drilled in the bracket. All right, we're going to use the same marine sealant for use above and below waterline that we used on the blade for the top bracket as well. We're going to seal the wire pass-through holes and all the screw holes to keep everything nice and watertight. We're also applying a bead of sealant around the gland seal. Now we're going to snug everything up to the transom and then fasten the bracket to the transom itself using the same screws that we used for the blade and the same number 3 Phillips bit. In doing this as well, you want to ensure that there is some sufficient slack for the wire when the actuator articulates, but at the same time you don't want to make it too loose to where there's too much slop. All right, and then as the last step to getting this actuator installed, we are going to put the top bolt and nut in. The nut will actually set into the bracket to hold it in place. And then when you slide the bolt in, just be mindful that you will need to get a tool on the other side. So in a pocket like this, you want to make sure that you slide it in from the side that has better access to get the tool in to tighten the bolt down. And now that the port side actuator and blade have been installed, we're going to repeat the process on the starboard side.
So at this point, we're going to install the Deutsch plugs on the power and can side. We have our Deutsch plug that's supplied within the kit, and we also have a red plug because we don't need one of the holes in the Deutsch plug, and this just seals it off. That goes into the number 4 plug, and then we're going to insert the appropriate cables in the appropriate holes that are actually in the manual itself. So red, number 1, white, number 2. Our shield is in number 3. And you'll hear an audible click when they're seated. Our black for the can power is in actually number 6. Blue can is in number 5. Now you can see that all of them are seated and set inside the Deutsch. Now we're going to do the retainer lock as well. You'll hear an audible click, and we're seated. For the power side, we have our Deutsch connector as well in the manual. It's notated in what socket they go into. The red lead goes into number 1, audible click. Black feed negative goes into number 2. And then we're going to insert the lock. We're done at that point. So now that we have installed the Deutsch connectors, we're going to build out the L2K side, the Lenco bus. Required in that is our 2 T's in the rear. We have our cable that's been pre-run already, and we're going to attach these to the spin lock. So this just created a trunk. Now we also have to have our resistor at the end to be NEMA compliant. And that's our L2K. What I have right here is the Deutsch to NEMA spin lock, or M12. And what we're going to do is we're going to snap that Deutsch connector together on the cam feed of one actuator. We're going to take that M12 spin lock and we're going to attach it to the L2K backbone on one side. Doesn't matter what side you pick. You can put it on either one. Now that we've connected one actuator to the cam, we're going to do the opposite actuator. Insert the Deutsch plug. We're going to take our M12 and our L2K and we're going to attach it to the other NEMA T. Now that we've made the L2K connections, we're going to attach the actuator power. On each actuator, as we noted earlier, you have a power feed. We're going to snap those Deutsches together. There's one actuator.
All right, moving over to the top side of the boat, we're going to install our Lenco Pro Control Auto keypad. You notice we have a pre-existing hole from the Lenco system that was on this boat prior. Our keypad will fit and drop right into that hole. We just have a little bit of a longer face on our keypad, so you want to make sure that there's enough room to accommodate that on the lower side of the hole, which in this case there is. Now we're inside the console of the boat, and on the back side we're going to use our locking collar to tighten down the keypad while somebody's on the top side ensuring that the face of the keypad is nice and straight. All right, now we're going to tap into the boat's existing NMEA 2000 network using 2 supplied T's and 2 drop cables. These drop cables will be different lengths in this application. One of these drop cables is going to be for our IMU in the Pro Control Auto system. The other drop cable is going to be for the keypad. All right, so to connect the keypad into the NMEA 2000 network already existing on board the vessel, we're going to disconnect one of the NTs and terminators here. So this is the power drop T. And now with the network detached, we are going to add a new T connector for the keypad. And for our Pro Control Auto system, you'll then add the other T connector for the IMU. All right, so now we're going to use one of our shorter drop cables to connect the longest network plug on the back of our keypad into the NMEA 2000 global network on board the vessel in one of the Ts that we have just installed. All right, and then the next step is going to be to connect the cable for the IMU into the NMEA 2000 global backbone on the boat for our Pro Control Auto systems, and then snake the cable to the location where the IMU will be mounted. All right, so now in the console, we are going to grab our actuator power leads and wire them into power for each individual actuator. They also require 20 amp circuit protection per actuator. In this case, as opposed to using the supplied inline fuse holders, we're actually going to connect into a pre-existing fuse block that's inside the boat. All right, since this boat is equipped with Mercury digital throttle and steering that's compatible, we're actually going to connect this SmartCraft cable into the back of the keypad through this large purple connection here. You'll hear an audible click to know that it's seated properly. And then this other end will connect into the Mercury J-Box in an open port. If your boat is not equipped with Mercury DTS, then through the back of the purple port on the keypad, you're going to connect the purple wake wire. Once seated, you'll connect this end into a port on your ignition that gets positive 12 volt power when the ignition is switched to the on position. All right, now we're going to build out the console side of our Lenco 2K L2K network. We've run a cable from the console to the back of the boat to connect into the actuators at the two T's and terminators at the backside. Now we're going to do something very similar here in the console, where we're going to take this backbone cable and we're going to connect in two T's, and now we are going to add the final terminating resistor to the system. With these two T connectors, we're going to run a power drop for the L2K network to give this network power, and then we are going to run a drop cable from one T to the short L2K cable that is labeled on the back of the keypad. All right, and now we are going to plug the L2K power drop into our fuse panel on the boat. All right, now for the final L2K connection, we are going to take this glass T here. We are going to connect a drop cable. And we're going to take the other end of this drop cable and connect it into the short port labeled L2K on the back of our keypad. All right, after analyzing different options for mounting the IMU on the boat, we've actually found a nice solid spot here on the sidewall inside the console to mount this IMU. To do so, we are actually going to use the optional bracket that we spoke about earlier. So we fasten the IMU to the bracket, and you'll notice in this bracket there are adjustment points to allow you to properly orient the IMU to the vessel. In terms of orientation, there are a few key steps. Step 1 on the baseline is to take a look for this arrow that's at the top of the IMU. You want this arrow oriented so that it is pointing towards the bow, the forward direction of travel of the boat. So in this case, the IMU will sit that way. In mounting the IMU, one of the key things that we look for is a nice sturdy spot that's not subject to vibration. So when we look at this spot here, we can see it's very sturdy on the sidewall, as opposed to potentially mounting it to a bulkhead like this that has a little bit of flex in it. That vibration will translate through the IMU and cause the system to have false readings, degrading your performance. And now we're going to talk about the orientation of the IMU itself in terms of port to starboard, bow to stern. You want it to sit as level as the boat sits when it floats in the water. So you want this IMU basically sitting level to the waterline as the boat floats. That's going to be key for this to get good solid readings of your pitch and roll data. Okay, now we're going to talk about IMU mounting on board the boat and reasons why we did not choose some locations that you may choose on your boat for one reason or another. So starting at the back of the boat in the bilge area, the IMU is very sensitive to EMI, which is electromagnetic interference. Down in the bilge, above where the water would sit, is a popular location to mount our IMU on the bracket. However, in the case of this boat, you'll notice that there is some machinery, as well as some larger, higher current carrying cables back here. These will likely cause EMI that will give you poor performance of the system. All right, and then moving slightly forward of the transom, this is yet another popular area where you can use our IMU bracket to mount the IMU on select boats. However, again, on this boat, you'll notice that there are some larger pumps. These can also cause EMI that will throw off the readings and degrade performance of the system. So this is also not a spot where we would recommend mounting. And then the last popular spot that we'll talk about is up here on top of the hardtop. Now on this boat, this may very well be a valid spot to mount the IMU. This is a nice sturdy top. On some boats, the tops will have a good amount of vibration, so you don't want to mount it up there because again, you'll get degraded system performance. However, we chose not to mount up here on this boat because of some of the wire runs down the legs. You definitely want to be cognizant of that and how much time that can take when you have another good spot available, like the one in the console that we chose. One of the final considerations for the IMU as well is you certainly want to be aft of the center line of the boat when you are looking in terms of bow to stern. So certainly I wouldn't go any farther forward from right about here where we chose to mount the IMU in the console of the boat. Another question that we're frequently asked is across the beam, port to starboard, where to put the IMU. Here in our case, it's not so sensitive, so if you do need to orient it more towards one side of the boat or the other, you'll still get good performance. Other considerations for EMI are going to be speaker magnets, autopilot pumps, and other high current draw accessories on board the boat.
Now that we have mounted the IMU in the location that we found best for this vessel, we're going to attach it to the NEMA network of the vessel, and that's where the IMU should be put. It does not go on the L2K side of the network. The only thing that's on that side of the network is the actuators themselves and a power drop. So we're going to attach this to the boat network, NEMA 2000, and a T that we have added. And we're going to attach that to our IMU connection.
Now to wrap up the physical installation of the hardware, we're going to neaten everything up with some zip ties, clean it all up, and then we'll start to commission the system. All right, now we've powered up the ignition and turned the battery switch on, so we've had the system wake up for the first time. You'll notice the top two green lights will be alternately flashing on top of the keypad, whether you have Pro Control Auto or Assist. On the keypad, you'll notice lights 1, 5, and 6 are flashing for GPS data, attitude data, and attitude rate data. Those lights will flash for the first 3 minutes that you turn your battery switch on, and that is because your IMU during that time is homing and getting a good position. And now that the lights have gone solid, we are ready to move on to the next step in the menu. So you'll see there's a flashing light up on the top left side. We are going to bump the dial to port 1 bump. Now the second light is flashing on the port side, and there is a solid light, the very first light, on the starboard indicator side. What that is telling us is that there's one keypad, the base station keypad, installed in this system. That is correct, so we will bump the dial again to port. And now we have 2 solid illuminated lights on the starboard side. That corresponds to each actuator installed at the back of the boat. That's telling us that the system sees 2 actuators. If they were flashing, that would tell us that it is not seeing one or both potentially actuators. In this menu, where the third LED on the port side is flashing and we have 2 solid lights for actuators, we are now going to instance them and assign them their own address on the Lenco 2K network. This will help with identifying them for the next step where we select which is port and which is starboard. To instance, we are going to long press and hold the dim button, which is the star located underneath the dial in the center of the bottom of the keypad, until all the lights on the indicator face flash. The next step is to bump the dial to port 1 more time so that the 4th light on the port side illuminates. From here, the next step would be to press the dim button, which will trigger 1 actuator to pulse up and down. This is where we identify which actuator is port and starboard. Prior to starting this process, we've gone ahead and made sure that the trim tabs are free from any obstructions, so that way they can move freely without potentially causing any damage. So we will go ahead and press the dim button again to trigger this function.
So now that Ryan's engaged the dim button for the tab pulsing, we can see that this side is actually the port side actuator pulsing, as you can see on the other side, which is the starboard side, which is the one we want to be pulsing, is not. So we're going to press the button on the keypad, the up button on the keypad, and we're going to switch sides to make it go to the starboard side. So now that Ryan has pushed the button, the up button on the keypad, to flip which side the actuator is now commanded to move, you can see that the port actuator has stopped oscillating, and now the starboard actuator, which is the correct side, is now oscillating.
Now that we've finished the initial setup and locating process, we are going to press and hold all 4 of the lower up and down buttons to exit the locating menu. Okay, now that the system has entered the calibration menu, we're going to leave everything at the default stock settings until we can run the boat on the water, commission it, and see how the boat performs and if there's any parameters that we need to adjust. So for the moment, we're going to exit out of this menu. On the Pro Control Auto keypad, it will be a 3-button press that combines the 2 top buttons, Auto Hold, plus the lower dim button, pressing all 3 simultaneously. And now we have entered the Sea Trial calibration menu, where you'll see the top 2 LEDs will flash. At this point, we need to launch the boat to finish the calibration, but if you do not have time to do that, you can still use your system in manual mode as traditional trim tabs would function. We will exit out of this menu by pressing the auto and hold buttons at the top of the auto keypad simultaneously. And now that we have exited out of the Sea Trial calibration menu, you'll see the system is on, status is ready, and the keypad is ready to be used as a manual trim tab controller until we commission on the water. So you can still do all your manual movements of the tabs until such time as you can launch the boat. And now that we've verified that the actuators are functioning and the system is ready, we're going to turn the key switch off at this point before turning the vessel power off through the battery switch to trigger a store in the system's memory of all these settings. Now that the key switch is turned off and the system is in standby mode with the vessel's battery still on, we want to wait at least 90 seconds for everything to save and store in the system before turning the key switch back on again or before turning the vessel power off. Okay, now that we've waited our 90 seconds for the settings to store, we're going to turn the key switch back on. You'll notice the system will wake, and now that it has acquired signal from both actuators, you can use the system in manual mode. You'll notice that the auto and hold buttons are not illuminated, and if you were to go to press the buttons, they will flash at you, meaning that we have not done the Sea Trial commissioning yet. When you are ready to perform your Sea Trial commissioning, you will wake the boat in this manner and then press and hold simultaneously the auto and hold buttons to enter the Sea Trial commissioning menu. Now we have the boat in the water at the dock, and we're going to do the Sea Trial commissioning part of the installation. The first step will be to capture level roll and resting pitch at the dock. Then we're going to take the boat out on the water, and we're actually going to capture when the boat breaks over to get on plane, and then we'll capture where the boat rides at wide open throttle. This will establish our pitch points for our system to auto level the boat. The first step in commissioning the system is to capture the resting level roll and resting pitch as well of the boat. So we want to get the roll even and then store that position in the system. We like to do a few things when we Sea Trial commission our boats if we can. Because your IMU lives on the NMEA 2000 backbone, your MFD screen on the boat, in this case our Simrad, can actually pick up data from the IMU. If you'd like to build out a data screen to show the IMU data that's being displayed, you should consult your MFD's instruction manual. On this screen, as you can see, we are showing attitude roll, speed over ground, the attitude of the pitch, and our trim tab position because our system will output trim tab data. And we're also showing engine RPM. One thing to note with regards to the IMU data in terms of attitude roll and attitude pitch is that is measuring absolute position of the IMU. Therefore, those numbers will vary depending on how your IMU was oriented and installed on the boat itself. On your first initial installation, your system should automatically enter the Sea Trial calibration menu as displayed by the rapidly flashing auto and hold lights at the top of the keypad. If it does not, however, you can enter this menu with a long press of the auto and hold buttons. Now that we're in the Sea Trial commissioning menu, you'll see 4 LEDs illuminated on the left-hand side of the dial face. The first LED will be flashing. This is where we go ahead and capture the level roll and resting pitch of the vessel. The first step in capturing level roll is to level the boat itself, and we do this by actually moving ourselves port to starboard on the boat until the bow is visually floating level. Once we have the bow level, we're going to make sure the boat is sitting pretty ambiently still, but a little bit of light movement in the slip is okay. We are going to press and hold the dim button, and that will store the level roll position that we have just established, as well as the resting pitch, and that will give us a home for our IMU. When we do a long press and hold of the dim button, you'll see all the indicator lights will flash to indicate that we've stored our resting home position, and then we can release the button at that point. Now that we've set the home position for level roll and resting pitch, we'll give the dial one bump counterclockwise and release. The second LED on the left-hand side will begin flashing, and one LED on the right-hand side will be illuminated. This one LED is indicating that the system is controlling for both pitch and for roll. We can actually turn pitch control off in our system if you'd like, depending on how your boat runs, and turn this into an automatic roll controller only. If you do this, you will not have the benefit of hole shot, and you will also not have pitch control through the system, but you will still have roll control. To do that, we press bow up on the center of the keypad. When the light is off, you'll notice that two lights go away on the left-hand side. That means that our commissioning at this point is now complete, as we have already set a level roll and we have turned pitch control off. We can do a long press and hold of the auto and hold buttons to exit the menu at this point in time. Today we are going to commission both roll and pitch, so we're going to turn pitch control back on in the system. At this point, we will give the dial one more bump to counterclockwise and enter the third portion of the menu, where we will take the boat out on the water and actually set up the on the water low speed and high speed pitch settings. All right, now we're out on the water and we're going to do the low speed pitch setup. So first what we did was we ran to a spot on the water that was relatively calm, because we want to get the true running angles of the boat when we capture this process. What we're going to do first, make sure the coast is clear, put the boat just in gear, and it's important that you do this, because if you do not, the tabs may auto retract. Because for this part, what we're going to do is actually deploy the tabs to 50%. That's another good reason why we pulled the tab position indication up on our MFD, but we also have the indicator lights on the right-hand side of the dial face that will tell us when the tabs are at 50% as well. All right, so what we're going to do is very gradually put the boat up on plane, and we're going to watch for both sides of the indicator lights on the keypad to flash at us. That's called our delta pitch. That is when the boat transitions from planing to actually being on plane. And that's a target that we're going to save, because that will tell our system that we now need to enter auto leveling when the system's actually operating in auto mode. So again, what we're going to do is put the boat up on plane very gradually. We're going to watch for those lights to flash. And then when those lights do flash, we're going to do a press and hold of the dim button on the keypad to store that position. It's very important when doing this that we don't overshoot. We don't want to over throttle too fast and run into a situation where we store a point that is beyond that triggered flash. So again, you want to watch for that flash, hold that position, store it, and then we're ready to move on to the next step. All right, now we've captured the low speed pitch setup, so the next step is going to be to capture the high speed pitch setup. So first thing that we're going to do, I like to bring the boat back to neutral. Some people like to keep running the boat, but the important thing is you want the tabs to be fully retracted during this process, because our system will auto retract at slow speeds or when in neutral if N2K is connected. You can also just press the bow up button and hold it in the center of the keypad until the tabs are fully retracted. What we're going to do at this point is actually run the boat at wide open throttle. And when we get there and we settle in at the fastest possible speed and the lowest possible typical pitch angle of the boat, we're going to press and hold the dim button to record that. Before we start this process, what we do is we do another bump of the dial to get into the high-speed pitch setup, and then we can begin. All right, now we're going to go wide open throttle in a straight line, and once the bow is settled in at our top speed, we will press and hold the dim button to store the high-speed pitch position. Now that we've captured the high-speed pitch position, our commissioning is complete. We can press and hold the auto and hold buttons to exit the menu, and then we can press the auto button to engage auto operation and use the boat and see how the settings work for us. If you're able to control the trim of your engine, for example, if you have an outboard or a stern drive, it's important to consider the trim angle of the boat when setting up both the low speed and high speed pitch. In a manual trim setting, you want to make sure that your trim angle on the engine is kept where it normally would be when you're operating the boat. However, on a lot of modern engines, like this one here, for example, we have an active trim system. So any automatic trim system should be engaged while you're setting up your Pro Control system, both low speed and high speed pitch. After running this boat around for a little bit, we noticed a couple of calibration settings that we actually wanted to adjust for optimum performance. So what we'll do now is we'll show you how to do that. So we recommend with your install, after taking the boat around for a couple of rides and trying it in some sea conditions, that you may want to consider adjusting some calibration settings with regards to gains, whole shot transitions, and certain transition speeds in the system. To do that, what we're going to do is press the auto, hold, and dim buttons simultaneously on the keypad, and that will enter that calibration menu. All right, now we're back at the dock, and the only thing left to do is to key off the ignition and wrap up the installation. This step is very important. When you key off the ignition for the vessel, you want to make sure that the battery switch remains on. This will put the system into standby mode, and this will trigger all the commission settings that you just set up out on the water to actually store and save into the system, so it does not re-enter commissioning mode every time you go back on the water. You want to wait at least 90 seconds after turning off your key before powering off your battery switch. You also want to be mindful as well, some systems will get powered off through the binnacle itself, depending on your engine manufacturer. On behalf of the crew here at Lenco, thank you very much for taking the time to watch this installation and commissioning video. If you have any questions, please feel free to check out lencomarine.navico.com, where you can find all sorts of resources, including owner's manuals and links to videos as well. Thank you very much.